Israel's government stands accused of funding groups who want to change the way worshippers pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. It goes against Israel's claims of maintaining the status quo at the sacred and sensitive site in Jerusalem. So is it a recipe for more tension in the occupied Palestinian territories? This is Inside Story. Hello there and a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Rising unrest in the occupied Palestinian territories is raising fears of a prolonged period of instability. 4 Israelis and 4 Palestinians have been killed in recent days. The latest, a 13-year-old boy shot in the chest by Israeli security forces in a refugee camp in Bethlehem. Israel has imposed more security measures to deal with growing unrest, including demolishing the homes of attack suspects and the broader use of detention without trial. Violence has increased as tensions rise at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, the site in the old city of Jerusalem, known to Jews as well as the Temple Mount. Now, before we bring in our guests, here's Mike Hanna explaining what's at stake from the Calandia crossing in the occupied West Bank.
Well, the status quo can be summed up in one word, and that is occupation. But under the Netanyahu government, occupation has intensified. Settlement growth in the occupied West Bank has spiraled, and the settler movement, which a decade ago was nothing but a fringe organization in Israeli society, has now become the dominant force in the Netanyahu government. And it's a settler movement, many analysts believe, who are advocating a change in the status quo on what Jews call the Temple Mount, the al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Settler movements are advocating free access to that particular site in defiance of the laws laid down by Israel's supreme religious body. They are calling for the rebuilding of the third temple on the site of the al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And one organization that has drawn up plans for this, the Temple Mount Institute, is directly funded to the tune of $100,000 a year by the Netanyahu government. Not only that, but a member of Netanyahu's cabinet has publicly advocated the building of a new temple on the site of the al-Aqsa Mosque compound. 15 years ago, Ariel Sharon walked on that compound. He sparked off the second Intifada. At the same time, his popularity soared and he got over 70% of support and became an Israeli prime minister. Some are arguing that the settler movement is looking for its Sharon moment. Mike Hanna, Inside Story, Calandia Checkpoint, Ramallah.
So plenty to discuss today. Let's bring in our guests to do so. In Chicago, we have Ali Abu-nimah, co-founder of Electronic Intifada. In Philadelphia, Gregg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum and former Ministry of Defence official in Israel. And in London, Ian Black, Middle East editor for The Guardian. Thank you all very much for joining us and welcome to Inside Story. Ali, if I might start with you and begin the discussion focusing on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Are we seeing a creeping change to the status quo, that delicate balance that has allowed Jews and Muslims to live side by side?
I think Mike Hanna laid it out very well. We are seeing not just a gradual change, but a very aggressive change. Let's remember that the entire Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount, is part of occupied East Jerusalem. Under international law, which I know Israel doesn't respect or feel it's bound by, under international law, Israel cannot change the status of these territories. It cannot change the institutions. But what is very worrying indeed, as Mike Hanna laid out, is the free rein the Israeli government is giving to groups like the Temple Institute, whose head, Rabbi Israel Ariel, just last month praised the killers, the settlers who burned a Palestinian family to death in the West Bank. Rabbi Ariel also last month called for President Barack Obama to be killed because of his supposed crimes against the Jewish people. This is the Temple Institute that is funded by the Israeli government, that is behind so much of the incitement, the violence, and the fears of Palestinians, that Israel's ultimate goal is indeed the destruction of al-Aqsa, and, as several Israeli government ministers have advocated, the construction in its place of a Jewish temple.
Greg, do you agree with that, or to what extent do you agree with that we are seeing aggressive attempts by this group to make changes at al-Aqsa Mosque compound?
So the first thing you have to do is differentiate between the policy of the Israeli government and the policy of the Temple Institute. If Israel wanted to take over the al-Aqsa Mosque, they could drop a 500-pound bomb on the Haram al-Sharif, take it over, clean the presence of any Palestinian areas, and build a third temple. They haven't done that yet, and that's indicative of the fact that they're not willing to do it. When Israel has a policy goal, they set it, and they're able to accomplish it. However, we have to look at the fine minutiae of who the Israeli government actually funds. I think that what we have to be able to see here is that if we have the Israeli government not just funding institutions like the Temple Institute and including members of its cabinet like Uri Ariel inside of its decision-making apparatus, you also have the Israeli government funding mosques in the Wadi Ara and members of Knesset from the Arab list who are calling for the destruction of Israel. So there are some funding mechanisms which may be used by the Israeli government in terms of its ability to have freedom of religion, freedom of democracy, but there also are some other areas that we're trying to be able to find without having this access.
I think Greg, Ali's just trying to make the point there that the particular institute here, the Temple Institute, is calling for the destruction of al-Aqsa, and that's the problem with the Israeli government funding it.
Right. Well, I think that the funding of the Institute is more of a heritage issue rather than it is the political positions of its head. You have to differentiate between the activities of what the Institute does itself in the Cardo in Jerusalem, trying to allow access to the Temple Mount for freedom of religion from the ability to go up there and pray. However, what you see is the Islamic Waqf employing individuals, not just disrupting Jews that are trying to go to its heritage area from the last 3,000 years, but also interrupting tourists that are going there. You had a member of Congress, Keith Rothfuss, visit the Temple Mount in the middle of August with a delegation of 3 other congressmen. You had Palestinian Authority and Islamic Waqf employees chase them off the Temple Mount, violating their ability to conduct their freedom of religion, trying to see where the birthplace of Judaism took place from, just because of political means. Even more than that, the Palestinian policy of stockpiling fireworks and rocks to rain down terror on individuals that are trying to visit there, and even employing individuals to shadow people there trying to limit their freedom of movement is indicative that the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and other organizations are using this as a political move rather than one which is what is not going to happen, which is the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That is not on the table here.
Okay, Greg.
It's a conspiracy theory and it should be left at that.
Point. Can you, just for our viewers for a moment, I mean, clearly we see from our two guests here that this is a very controversial topic. Can you explain why al-Aqsa Mosque compound is such a sensitive site?
The Al-Aqsa Mosque is a sensitive site because it's the third holiest site in Islam after the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. And for Jews, of course, it's the site, as they believe, of the Jewish temple. That makes for a very, very toxic combination. It was managed for many years throughout the Ottoman Empire, even throughout the British Mandate period, with a status quo that held. Occasionally, when it didn't, there were outbreaks of serious trouble. Most notably, people will know back in 1929, the famous disturbances of that year, which focused on the issue of the Wailing Wall, the western wall of the Jewish temple, which is, of course, adjacent to the Haram al-Sharif. So these are two religious claims. They're not really reconcilable, and when attempts have been made to deal with them politically, as was the case in the negotiations over the Oslo Agreement in 1993, it wasn't possible. So the status quo has held. The question now is,
Ali, okay.
The question now
Let's Ali jump in there. Why don't you agree with that, with what Ian's saying?
Can the status quo
I mean, a couple of things. First of all, you know, Gregg Roman and I actually agreed on something. He doesn't dispute that the Israeli government funds the Temple Institute. All he's trying to tell viewers is, look, it's no big deal that the Israeli government funds these extremists who want to destroy al-Aqsa. Now, he talks about rocks and fireworks. Let's actually look at what Palestinians are afraid of. Remember that in 1967, June 1967, when Israel occupied East Jerusalem, the first thing it did was destroy the Mughrabi, the Moroccan quarter, in order to create what is now the Western Wall Plaza, which is considered one of the most revered sites for Jewish people. When it destroyed the Mughrabi quarter, it also destroyed one of the most ancient mosques in Jerusalem. So we're not talking about fanciful imagination. We're talking about real things that have happened. You look at what happened in Hebron after the massacre by the American settler Baruch Goldstein. What did Israel do? It used that massacre as an excuse to go in and take over most of the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron and hand it over to Israeli settlers. So this is what Palestinians are afraid of. And with all respect, I don't agree with Ian Black that these things are irreconcilable. If it was a matter of access for religious communities, as he said, that has been managed for centuries. Muslims, Christians, and Jews had access to Jerusalem. What is causing the problem is Israel's violent and aggressive colonization of Jerusalem and more
Greg,
broadly the West Bank.
You in here.
And it's claimed that it alone should control everything.
We could just let Greg respond to your fears. Are they realistic?
Right.
Is the destruction of al-Aqsa Mosque imminent with the arrival of these Jewish settler groups, these Jewish activist groups coming onto the compound?
Imminent.
Okay, but is it a possibility then?
Mr. Abu-nimah sounds, it's not a possibility. Mr. Abu-nimah sounds more like a spokesperson for the Palestinian Islamic Jihad when he uses these vile accusations of the Judaization of Jerusalem.
Well, personal insults don't get you out of the facts.
He has a very short memory. When we look at 1967, or the time period between 1948 to 1967, the illegal occupation of Jerusalem by the Jordanian government violated the UN resolution that established the State of Israel. There were supposed to be shared use of religious sites. There was supposed to be shared residency between the Islamic areas, between the Christian areas, between the Jewish areas, and between the Armenian areas. I think that the bottom line of what we're looking at here is that Mr. Abu-nimah has a problem with the freedom of religion and the freedom of movement.
Okay,
he's using these accusations which have been disproven time and time again.
Throwing around insults, let's just stick and try to move forward in this discussion. Ian, this is clearly a very sensitive site. So why are these groups being allowed access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound? Why are they being allowed to tour when it's creating such provocation?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is that over the last 20, particularly the last 10 years, you've seen a process where politics in Israel have drifted steadily to the right. You currently have the most right-wing government in Israeli history. You also have, paradoxically, liberal elements in Israeli society, one of which produced an excellent report that I suspect we're all referring to without having yet cited it, by Ir Amim, which is a progressive Israeli body which focuses on the situation in Jerusalem. And it has a very long 70-page, pretty comprehensively documented report about the temple movement organizations and their links with the Israeli government. And it makes the very accurate point that 20 years or so ago, these kind of organizations were on the radical fringes of Israeli Jewish society. And over that time, they have moved much closer to the center. And they have people, as we've heard in the introduction from Mike Hanna, and Ali Abu-nimah has also mentioned it, they have supporters in the Israeli government. And I don't think it's that hard to understand what's going on. It clearly is wrong for a government which wants to give the impression that it is doing the right thing and pursuing peace and so on, to be supporting organizations with such an extreme, volatile and dangerous agenda. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't myself think it's realistic to claim that there is any plan afoot to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, simply because the implications of that are too terrible to contemplate. But there is no doubt, certainly reading the Amim report, of the relationship between the Israeli government and these kind of organizations. And the answer to the question is the changing political climate in Israel, which is also linked, I think, to the broader question, important in the backdrop, the complete absence of any kind of negotiations and any possibility that this most toxic and, as we now are reminded, volatile of conflicts has any chance of being resolved anytime soon. And the longer it isn't resolved, the more extremists are going to be setting the agenda. And I think that is the subtext of what we're discussing here. I think we can stay firmly on that ground without going into the realm of paranoia and fantasy about something extraordinary. The reality is bad enough, I think, without exaggerating the immediate dangers.
OK, I think now is a good opportunity to broaden out our discussion a little further, because some analysts do say that rising dissatisfaction is creating the conditions for a new Palestinian uprising or intifada. A recent survey suggests 2/3 of Palestinians want Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to resign. An even higher number believe the institutions of the Palestinian Authority are corrupt. And an overwhelming majority of Palestinians believe Israel intends to annex the occupied territories and either expel them or deny them their rights. Just over half say they now oppose the two-state solution, whilst 43% say armed action is the most effective way to establish a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Ali Abu-nimah, 43% of Palestinians favouring armed action. I mean, that's an awful lot. But how united are Palestinians in a desire for another big period of unrest?
I don't think any Palestinians want more suffering, more conflict, more violence. But I think that Palestinians understand that they're living under an Israeli military regime that is not prepared to offer them any horizon for their freedom. I was just accused of not supporting religious freedom. Well, this Israeli government, as Ian Black said, is the most right-wing in history. It's the most openly racist. And it's made it very clear that it has no intention ever of ending its occupation, no intention of slowing down its confiscation of Palestinian land, no intention of stopping the violent colonization. We've just seen this week the Israeli government punitively destroying the homes of families of Palestinians accused of violence, while it still claims that it can't find the settlers who burnt to death a Palestinian family. And just look at the epitome of apartheid is the very fact that if you're a Palestinian and your son is accused of something, the Israeli army will come and destroy your house. Well, I can assure you, none of the settlers involved in attacks on Palestinians will have their houses bulldozed by the Israeli army. This is an untenable situation, but the so-called international community is allowing it to go on, continuing to arm Israel, continuing to protect it from consequences. And as long as that's the case, I'm afraid more and more Palestinians will be driven to the conclusion that really there is no hope unless they take things into their own hands.
Greg, we're seeing this current cycle of violence, these attacks, these protests, these home demolitions. Is there any political will in the Netanyahu government to curb this current escalation?
There definitely is a political will in the current Netanyahu government to curb this escalation. But we just have to look at the history of Israeli governments going from right and left and center to see what the Israeli government is willing to do when peace comes onto the table. A just peace, an acceptable peace, one that will end the occupation of Palestinian areas in Area A and B, and in Area C, those which will be left up to negotiations. Every single time that the Palestinian Authority or Hamas has been given an option to negotiate with Israel,
let's just stick to the current situation now. At the moment, we're seeing people out on the streets.
Right, I'm talking about the current situation.
Okay, well, let's talk
right
about
now.
the violence,
I'm talking
not the
about the
negotiations.
current situation right now.
How does the Israeli government curb this violence?
The Israeli government's going to have to probably operate another Operation Hamot Magen, another David Shield. And in doing so, it'll be able to root out the Palestinian terror cells that are currently responsible, not just for committing acts of violence, but for the incitement that goes all the way up to the top of the president of the Palestinian Authority. Now, he's saying that I'm calling for a massacre, but what I'm saying is when you see little babies stabbed in the middle of the old city, and you see individuals that are egging them on and spitting on victims when they're bleeding in the middle of the old city, there has to be a response from the Israeli government. Now, just remember, this cycle of violence was not started by Israel. It was started by the Palestinian Hamas in trying to egg on the use of the al-Aqsa Mosque as a religious issue to incite violence. The Israeli response to this has been so doing so. And with the occupation, every time that the occupation has been brought up as a subject, there's been times to ameliorate that subject, and the Palestinians have rejected solutions. So what can a Palestinian resident of Nablus, Jenin, or Ramallah expect? When their government is leading them into disaster, they have no hope. I understand why they're not in favor of a two-state solution. We have to find good Palestinian leadership and not functionaries like Mr. Abu-nimah speaking from Chicago trying to find out what's going on with this.
Let Ali jump in there.
Sure, I can ask me any question.
I have a question. Yes, absolutely. Mr. Roman claims that the Palestinian Authority is engaging in incitement against Israel. But isn't it a fact that the Palestinian Authority's security forces are actually working with the Israeli government, with the Israeli occupation forces right now? If the Palestinian Authority is such an enemy of Israel as he claims, why, as we speak right now, why are the Israeli occupation forces coordinating with them? And this really brings it back to the issue of occupation.
The reason you see,
let's
let Gregg answer your question. We're running out of time.
I will. Just one. Sure.
So unfortunately, unlike Mr. Abu-nimah, I don't live in a binary world where there's only the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government. There are different vestiges of cooperation on different levels between the Palestinians and between the Israelis. So while on the top tier political levels, you have this vitriol coming out of Mahmoud Abbas's mouth, whether it be at the UN or whether it be calling for more martyrs to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque to spill blood. And this is a quote from Palestinian television that Mr. Abbas gave, saying that we don't want the Jews' filthy feet on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and we bless every drop of blood spilled by the Shahada, which is going on. So
Ian,
one leader may say one thing, another leader may say another thing, but there's some game.
We're running out of time, gentlemen. Let's just get a more independent voice here. How do you read the situation, and what happens moving forward?
I'm quite independent. Thank you.
If I can't speak, I can't really contribute anything to the debate. So, with all due respect to my fellow guests, can I just say a word? I was asked, and I think that it's clear from the exchanges before, particularly from the Israeli representative, that with all the talk of security, clearly Israel has the upper hand in a vast sense. It has the cooperation, of course, as Ali Abu-nimah has pointed out, of the Palestinian Authority. But security isn't a sufficient answer to this. Israel's security has been the dominant theme since 1967. It hasn't resolved the problem. We're seeing we're at the beginning of what may be another serious escalation. Maybe it'll be a third intifada. Maybe, like the others, it'll take the lives of hundreds or more people and contribute to further hatred and escalation. So clearly security isn't enough. To my mind, call it simple, call it familiar. The only way to deal with this is to step back, to look at the big picture, to look at the conflicting claims, to look at the persistence, yes, of occupation over so many years, and to try to resolve it. Because it can't be managed. Everything we're seeing now is a reminder, a bloody, bitter and hateful reminder of that. There's a huge disproportion of force between the two sides, and security can't do it. The answer has to be to go back to the fundamentals and to try to forge some way to negotiate about the future, because this is no way to proceed.
Ali, is it possible to take a step back and look at the situation from a broad picture, from the historical point of view, and then find a solution?
Yes, it is. And I just, with all due respect, I wasn't very comfortable with the implication that I can't be independent, perhaps because I come from a Palestinian background. Everything I've said is quite factual and verifiable. And indeed, I agree with Ian Black that that really, ultimately, Israel cannot oppress and occupy and arrest and demolish its way out of this situation any more than apartheid
I'm afraid
South
we're going to
Africa
have
could,
to leave
or the
today's
British could in
discussion.
Northern
We have
Ireland. It
run
needs
out
a
of time. My
political
apologies,
solution.
gentlemen. We will be having this discussion again in the future, but for now, I'm afraid we are going to have to call that a day. Many thanks to all my guests, Ali Abu-nimah, Gregg Roman and Ian Black. And thank you too very much for watching. You can leave your comments on the programme page of our website, aljazeera.com. And you can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.